Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 6:45 PM and a quorum of members is present. So the meeting of the Board of Education of the School District of New Berlin is called to order. Please call the roll.
Ms. Crosby,
Here.
Mr. Helmer, Ms. Konick, Ms. Schultz,
Here.
Mr. Seidel, Ms. Spindler,
Here.
Mr. Zelinski.
Here.
So Ms. Konick, Mr. Helmer, and Mr. Seidel all let me know that they are unable to be here this evening. So then do I have a motion to recess to closed session?
I move to adjourn into closed session pursuant to section 19.85, 1C, E, and F of the Wisconsin statutes to consider A, the approval of closed session minutes of May 27th, and B, the employment, performance, and compensation matters pertaining to staff.
Second that.
I have a motion by Ms. Crosby and a second by Mr. Zelinski. Please call the roll.
Ms. Crosby,
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski,
Yes.
Ms. Schultz,
Yes.
Ms. Spindler.
Yes.
We are moving into closed session and return to open session around 7 o'clock. It is now 7 o'clock, and we are returning from closed session into open session. In recognition of the serious and important nature of our efforts here, we will join in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. For all those who are able, please rise. And this is the portion where we have a moment of silence. I'm going to pass this to Superintendent Garza.
Yes, so unfortunately, we received sad news Saturday morning that one of our fourth grade students at Ronald Reagan passed away unexpectedly as a result of a boating accident on Little Muskego Lake. The student was he had just finished fourth grade on Friday, and as I understand it, was a very articulate, well-spoken, kind, and polite young man. He leaves behind his mom and dad and his younger brother, who is currently finished kindergarten over at Ronald Reagan. And we're certainly sad of the news. We have been in contact with the family and the Ronald Reagan community, letting them know that we are here to support whoever is needed given the devastating news. In the communication that we sent out, there is a GoFundMe page and a meal train plan that's also out there. So for those that happen to be listening, please take a look out on social media. That's all out there. But certainly saddened by the news. And as we enter into this moment of silence, please keep the student and the family in our thoughts and prayers.
This is a public meeting of the Board of Education. Prior to this meeting, notice was given to the public last Friday by providing the agenda to the City Library. The agenda was also posted on the district website. A copy of the agenda was forwarded to the Journal Sentinel, the Waukesha Freeman, and the Waukesha Now, all of which have filed requests for all public notices. And we have a recognition this evening for our student representative, Claire Markovsky.
So it is with great pride that we recognize Ms. Claire Markovsky as she completes her term as the Eisenhower Student Representative for the School District of New Berlin's Board of Education. Claire has consistently demonstrated a remarkable work ethic, challenging herself in her pursuit of academic excellence. She's an advocate for her own learning, actively working with teachers and fellow students to elevate her educational journey. She has taken on and successfully completed rigorous coursework to support her future goals, and her aspirations to pursue a career in business with the intention of earning a degree in supply chain management with a possible minor in Spanish are a testament to her ambition and dedication. Beyond her academic achievements, Claire has taken on numerous leadership roles. She has served as a captain of the Eisenhower girls soccer team, been an active member of the student athlete leadership team, DECA, and student union, among others. Her involvement in various student activities, community events, and volunteer work highlights her commitment to making a positive impact within our district and greater community. As one of two volunteer student representatives on the school board, Claire has provided invaluable insights and represented her peers well throughout her term of service. Her leadership is truly commendable and has been supportive of the success of our district. Claire, we are grateful for your contributions, your dedication, drive, and caring nature, and lasting impact on Eisenhower, our district, and community. We have no doubt that you will continue to excel in all your future endeavors. Thank you, Claire, for your exceptional service, and best of luck in all that lies ahead. Yes, can we get?
Okay. Should we come over here? Yes.
Claire, right in the middle of the expect excellence there. There you go.
No pressure. In the future, right? Should we move this a little bit? Little bit. Right and left.
All right. And good luck tomorrow? Thursday, got it, all right. Good luck Thursday. All right. Claire, I know you're super busy, so
Yes.
we'll see you later.
Thanks. I know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming back
I didn't
tonight.
tell my mom where I was. Right there. I know. Oh, good.
Oh, did we get her?
Oh, the names.
So, Claire, is it sectionals?
Yes, sectional semis at home on Thursday. I guess towards the east. 4:30. 4:30. Soccer here.
All right, good luck. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Okay, then, privilege of the floor, do we have any this evening?
No.
Okay. President's message, I would like to congratulate all of our new graduates. Again, we had some very lovely graduation ceremonies where members of the board were able to attend this past Friday and past Saturday. And so we wish all of our graduates well, and we're so proud of you. It's just amazing, all the accomplishments we hear that our students have done this year. Administrative team report, superintendent's update.
I'll just defer my updates to the regular agenda items.
Okay. So we have the consent agenda. Next up, do I have a motion for the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I have a motion by Ms. Crosby and a second by Mr. Zelinski. And by the way, it includes the notice, the approval of minutes of May 27th, and the WIAA 25-26 membership renewals. Do you want to pull out anything for separate consideration? Then hearing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes. I'm sorry, I probably missed discussion there, but did anybody have any discussion? Okay. Usually don't. Up next is the Teaching and Learning Spring Screener presentation.
So as the board is aware, we have a new cadence this year for our data presentations to the board. I'm going to have the team give you the most updated information that we have. Please note that while we are currently in receipt of the forward data from the state exams, we literally just received those late last week. So as soon as we get more information, we'll be able to do some internal comparisons, but it still won't be probably at least another couple months, I think, Matt, and Kelly and Amanda, before we actually are able to do comparisons externally. So with that, I'll hand it over to the team.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Amanda Mazurkowitz, and I am the Director of Student Services. And our teaching and learning team is here tonight. So we have Kelly Kwiatkowski, our Director of Secondary Teaching and Learning, and Matt Stepneski, our Director of Elementary Teaching and Learning. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I am going to just also draw your attention to board in your packet that you have two different sets of handouts. One is disaggregated data by school, and that shows you comparisons from each of our 6 schools from fall to spring using our universal screening data, so you can see the growth within the school year. And then you also have a separate packet that has disaggregated data for our subgroups that is spring to spring, year over year, so you can see it's not true cohort data, but kind of gives you a look at how those subgroups are performing year over year. So this presentation this evening is going to focus on FastBridge, which is our consistent universal screener that we use kindergarten through 9th grade. You're also going to see some Ames Web Plus data. That's for our youngest learners as part of Act 20 that Matt will present on. And all of that information, so the information that is in your packets, to the information that we're going to present forward, like Joe just talked about, as well as classroom assessment data, progress monitoring data, all of that filters into, and it allows us to create our district action plan. We're actually going to spend the next 3 days as a district leadership team and with school leadership teams, really diving further into data and learning about a process called SAIL, which is a leadership process to help us create action plans. And so we'll have a district action plan that feeds into our school action plans, and ultimately down to that classroom and teacher level where they're creating student learning objectives and looking at individual instruction education, intervention, and extension opportunities for students. So with that, I'm going to just go ahead and ground us in this graphic that you've seen before when we've come up to present. And it really is just a great reminder that our ultimate goal is to produce students who are college and career ready. And we use multiple pieces of data to do that. So a universal screener, which we're going to talk about tonight, really is something that helps us just look at and inform overall instruction. So it helps us understand which students are meeting our benchmarks, which students might need additional intervention, and which students are ready for some extension. There's also other measures like the forward exam that are ultimately a measure of achievement for students, and then as for your overall district that feeds into the school report card, which as you know is a measure of district and school accountability. Then we use other pieces of data like our common assessments in all subject areas and grades and progress monitoring data, which really then drive the actual daily instruction for our students. When we think about a universal screener, best practice is to give that 3 times a year, and it's given outside of the general curriculum. And it helps identify those student strengths and areas for growth. As mentioned on the last slide, and when I started, FastBridge is our consistent universal screening tool that we use kindergarten through 9th grade. We had some internal discussions about what to do with FastBridge now that we have to use Ames Web, but we're gonna use Ames Web for the Act 20 purposes in those lower grades, but consistently still use FastBridge so that we have that K-9 look, particularly in math as well. So 4 through 9 for all areas, and then K through 9 in math. So as I said before, it really is to help us look at intervention for students, extension for students, and it also, when you're using a universal screening tool, what it does is it allows you to see if your curriculum is solid. A solid curriculum will reach at least 80% of students. As we get started here, just going to give you a reminder of who we are as a district in terms of our demographics and how that compares to our surrounding districts. That's also helpful when, as Joe talked about, we're looking at external measures like ACT and Forward, and we can compare that to how we're doing against other districts, but then seeing those demographics also plays a critical factor. The 2 farthest columns to your right are the most recent sets of data, though we give you that trend data back all the way through 2020. So what you've already seen before is the 3rd Friday in September data, and that's our pupil count that is certified with DPI. And then we also had a pupil count in May. And one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to is overall we are down 5 students in our overall enrollment. However, we have increased in the number of students who are considered economically disadvantaged. So we have 60 more students throughout the school year that are classified as being economically disadvantaged. And we also have grown in the number of students who are considered English learners by having another 19 students just in September in our schools who are have limited English proficiency. Here is how we compare to other, so we weren't able to give you in earlier presentations the 2024-2025 because that data was not yet public, but now it is, so that you can see the most recent data across our area. And this is the percentage of students who are considered economically disadvantaged. Here is the percent of students who have disabilities or who have IEPs. We'll talk about students with disabilities in a couple of slides as well when we talk about 504 plans, but 504 plans is not a publicly gathered set of data, so we can only compare for students who have IEPs. And then here is the percent of students who are considered English language learners, or again, who have that limited English proficiency. And as you can see, we are this have the 2nd highest percentage in the area, just behind Waukesha. Digging a little bit deeper, so going back to those students with disabilities, again, you have on the 2nd to bottom row and then the bottom row that 3rd Friday count compared to our May data count. And one of the things that you will notice is that our students with IEPs have grown throughout the school year, particularly at our elementary level. We had 15 more students identify as having a disability at our elementary level throughout the school year. Although a success is that we dismissed almost 10 students at our secondary level. And so that helps us know that over time in our district, as we're continuing to work with students and provide that high level of intervention, we are exiting some students out of special education. And then this refers to those students who have 504 plans. Did you have a question? In terms of students with disabilities? Yeah, so a couple of different ways, yes. One is through that screening, and after we've provided intervention to students, if we notice that that intervention is not intense enough and they haven't grown enough, then we may refer them for a special education evaluation and dig a little bit deeper and determine that they are eligible for services. Sometimes it's also by parent referral or teacher referral outside of that screening process. It's really just based on what their needs are and what the referral is for. So here is that slide that shows the overall number and percentage of students who have 504 plans. So a 504 plan, the student still has a disability. They're categorized as having a disability under the law, but where they don't receive that specially designed instruction and intervention that's part of an IEP, they do receive accommodations that our classroom teachers are responsible for ensuring are provided within the classroom, which is really important for those students, and it also is something that our teachers take very seriously in order to make sure that those students can access the curriculum. Most notably, we have increased the number even throughout the school year at both the elementary and secondary level, with just over 25 students at the secondary levels being eligible for a 504 plan, and about 15 students at that elementary level. And then those ILPs are for students who are considered English learners or who have that limited English proficiency. This is that fastest growing subgroup that I've talked to you about the last couple of presentations, where as you can see since 2020, we've over doubled the number of students who are identified as English learners in this year alone. We've increased even throughout the school year, as I talked about on that earlier demographic slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Matt, and he's going to walk you through the elementary results of our spring screening data. Thank you. Let me get this out of your way, Mr. F.
Good evening. So we're going to be reviewing FastBridge fall to spring data and Ames Web Plus winter to spring. And Ames Web Plus is the universal screener that's mandated by Act 20. Started this winter. All right, so at or above the 40th percentile is considered proficient. And so, as mentioned earlier, 80% proficiency lets us know, that our core instruction is effective for most students, but of course, always striving to go above that mark. This is the universal screener for Ames Web Plus that measures fluency. Nice area of growth here. It's very similar to the FastBridge CBM. It's a 1-minute passage that the kids have to read. So the test is similar, but the levels of rigor are different. So for example, for 3rd grade, the amount of words read correct per minute that's expected of FastBridge is 125, but for oral reading fluency, it's 118. Just two different tests, and even the words that are selected that are for these passages, even that level of rigor or the different types of words that they put in are very different depending on the passages that are given to the student. So that's the fluency measures. These are all spring to spring over time, or over year to year. And this is our FastBridge CBM spring to spring, year over year for our subgroups. Students did not take the Ames Web oral reading fluency in the spring of last year, so this is just FastBridge. And so, let me see where I got my notes here, sorry. One way to look at this, as we talked about last time we met, was to just pick out one subgroup and see their growth over time. And another way is to look at that subgroup and then compare it to students, for example, without disabilities. So take students with disabilities, and you can go, year by year, but you could also compare the gap to where peers without disabilities are performing. One thing to consider when looking at the subgroup data is that the needs of one particular student with a disability or English not being their first language can be drastically different than the needs of another student in that subgroup. Also to note, some students may be part of multiple subgroups. FastBridge A reading, this measures general reading skills. So this is all students at or above the 40th percentile. Each spring, year over year. And now this is also FastBridge A reading, but this is all students at or above the 55th percentile. Now with the new test and new cut scores on the forward exam, a correlation can no longer be made with students performing at or above the 55th and then performing really well on the forward exam. That's something we used to look at every year, and we can't do that anymore because of how the forward exam has changed. So this will probably be most likely the last time we share this data set with you, utilizing that 55th. So still with FastBridge A reading, but this is following a cohort of students, so third graders from last spring to their fourth grade year now. Not exactly the same students, but the majority of the students are the same. And it's a way to look at their growth from one year to the next. And this is that same cohort at or above the 55th percentile. Staying with A reading, general reading skills, this is at or above the 40th percentile for subgroups. Noticing each subgroup over time, and then comparing the achievement of one subgroup to the rest of the students. Moving on to math, FastBridge A math. This is all students at or above the 40th. This measures general math skills. And then here's your A math at or above the 55th. A math third to fourth grade cohort. And then the same cohort at or above the 55th. And then here's your general math skills with subgroups. And then finally for math, we measure fact fluency or automaticity. So this is FastBridge at all students third grade at or above the 40th. Here they are at or above the 55th. And automaticity for our subgroups. Some really nice growth over time with our subgroups with fact fluency in math. So some things to highlight this evening. Also, as Amanda mentioned in your packet, we just talked about the subgroups in auto math, consistent growth over year. One thing when we were here in the fall, we talked about that third grade CBM reading, their fluency. That was an area of growth for us, an area of concern back in the fall. And so we talked about some of the action steps we're going to do for that. And then they started the year at 73% above the 40th, and now they're at 81%. So a nice growth that became a strength. And the subgroups, as we showed in this slide, every subgroup grew in oral reading fluency. So they took that, kindergarten through third graders took that third grade oral reading fluency passage for the first time in the winter. And then they grew from winter to spring, even with a new test. And so this is all the students, but in your packet, you'll be able to see the subgroup growth in that. So now some areas of growth or areas of concern that we're going to look at over the summer are the subgroups for A reading. So we've noticed that there's a pretty large gap as far as the percent of students at or above the 40th with the subgroups, even though we did have the students with disabilities grow from 37% to 48%. There is still a large enough gap to be a little bit of concern or area of growth for us. And then when we look at fluency, so CBM reading for FastBridge, overall we're at that 80% mark, but once again, that gap with the subgroups is a concern. But when you do take a look at your packet, you'll see that those students that are economically disadvantaged, they had some really nice growth in that fluency measure this year. Amanda mentioned the action plans that come out of data reviews like this, and that's why we wanted to have in your packet. You could look at each data set for each school for each test, and then we determine district action plans, school action plans, and student learning objectives. And a lot of that work's going to start tomorrow with the SAIL Academy, along with our math alignment. We've been researching resources all year, and teachers will be piloting a new math curriculum for next year. Thank you so much. Kelly and secondary.
So similar to elementary, we give FastBridge 3 times a year in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. with the exception of students who are after post-algebra. So we're going to start with A reading. A reading is most similar to the forward reading passages as well as the ACT. It's measuring comprehension and some general reading skills. We are consistently around 80%, this year being 79% of students are proficient, which is defined at or above the 40th percentile. When looking at cohorts, so our 7th grade students from last year, spring of '24, to our 8th grade students this year, spring of 2025, we did see some growth similar to the growth that we saw last year from our 7th graders who are now 8th grade students in the A Reading Universal Screening Assessment. When looking at 7th graders over time in subgroups, that is our subgroup picture. When looking at auto reading, and this is basic foundational reading skills. So the morphology, vocabulary, basic reading skills that you would expect your students to have in 7th grade. This is how they're doing over time. We did see a slight decrease, but still consistent with the above 80% of students. And when looking at cohort data, those were our 7th graders last year to 8th grade this year. I think what's important to note is that we're looking at which of those students were successful last year that are not successful this year. We also noticed that we're seeing some success with something called Morpheme Magic, where we're working on Latin roots with our 7th graders quite extensively each day in 7th grade English class. We're seeing success with that. So for next year in 8th grade, a group of teachers are working on that over the summer to do the same thing with our 8th grade students. And this is the 7th grade auto reading, again, some foundational reading skills within our subgroups. I think it's important to know our Econ Dis population saw a big amount of, I don't want to say growth because it's not the same students last year as this year, but we saw an increase in students who are proficient at 7th grade, and that's tier 1. Just because a student is Econ Dis does not mean that they're in an intervention. Our students, many of our students who are students with disabilities who have a reading deficit or a student who is identified as EL are in interventions. As far as A Math, now we're talking about math, this is most similar to the forward or the ACT type assessment with math questions in the area of pre-algebra, algebra, geometry, and then if they get those right, they go up to algebra 2 and some trigonometry. We see a consistent growth, everything above the 80th percentile. And then when looking at cohort data, so 7th grade students in spring last year to 8th grade students this year, we did see a decline. We know that's 15 students. We're looking at those students and what kind of topics that they struggled with in mathematics, what courses that they're in, which school are they at. We're digging in deeper over the next couple of weeks to figure out if we can see any trends and if we could have prevented any of that dip. When looking at a math proficiency by subgroup, that is our picture. We didn't see the same success we saw last spring. When looking at our auto math, so this is our fast fluency math skills, we did see an increase when looking at our 7th grade students over time, with 85% of our students at or above the 40th percentile. This is something that our middle school teachers have been working on at both schools. And this is the 7th graders last year, and now they're 8th graders this year. And these are students in our subgroup, with all of our subgroups looking more successful than those from last year in spring, or the same. And these would be skills if students are in intervention that they're directly working on. So areas of strength that we saw, our 7th to 8th grade proficiency levels in A reading and auto math grew slightly when examining cohort data. We still have some growth to do in our subgroup, specifically students with disabilities in mathematics. And we are looking at with our alignment work too, to making sure we're selecting some resources that can help us in that area and in some instructional strategies that we might need to improve upon. Points of emphasis, this was from fall, but our 7th grade students were coming in similar to last year's levels of proficiency. We are still meeting with our building leadership teams weekly, which was something that we implemented this year, where half of their meetings need to be looking at either school-based data, district data, or classroom data to examine growths, concerns, trends. And then we continue to target professional development in the area of literacy throughout this year. And we are also analyzing what our incoming 6th graders students are great at, what they need a little bit more work at, so when we get them in fall, we can start and hit the ground running right away. I want to say thank you to our elementary principals and staff who've given us great information in our transition meetings to be able to do that this year. And then new for FastBridge, we added some new math diagnostic assessments so we can better understand what our students need in those math interventions, to know exactly what type of intervention is needed. And just like Amanda said, this is just part of our data story. So we also examine forward assessment, ACT, classroom assessment, and it really helps develop our goals from the classroom level to the school level to the district level to the board level, and all of those should align with our strategic plan and goals so we have coherence as a system. Any questions?
Yeah, could you
Yeah.
explain what the Ames Web versus FastBridge? I don't really understand that.
Absolutely.
So they're both universal screeners, but Ames Web is the one that the state says we have to do now for kindergarten through 3rd grade. And so the tests that they have to take, they're similar, but one is just mandated by the state. And so when we talk about, if we're talking about fluency, for FastBridge, their fluency test is the CBM. And if we're talking about the fluency test for Ames Web, it's the oral reading fluency. So different names, but it's still a 1-minute passage that the students read, and we see how many words correct per minute can they do. For Ames Web, they read 2 passages, and there's like an average of their score. For FastBridge, it's 3 passages. But it's both measuring fluency. For another example would be kindergartners. So for Ames Web, they are supposed to do 4 different subtests for Ames Web: letter, word, sound fluency, letter naming fluency. And then for FastBridge, it's called the early reading assessment, but they're also looking at letter names, letter sounds. So similar tests, but the way that they score them, or the way that, like we said, some of the words that are chosen for the students makes the rigor different. But they're both assessing fluency. They're both assessing general reading skills. Just that the state, Act 20 says you have to give Ames Web to kindergarten to 3rd graders.
So FastBridge will be used for 4th and up, and
Yes.
then Ames Web will be used. Okay. So
Yeah.
the younger kids don't have to do both. They'll just do Ames.
Correct. This spring, we had them do both.
Okay.
Because in the fall, they only did FastBridge.
Yeah.
Because Ames Web didn't start until winter. It wasn't mandated until winter. So then spring came, and our teachers are very flexible, and they're very willing to do whatever. They did both so that we would have both sets of data to show growth from fall to spring, and then from winter to spring. Next year, it'll be K through 3 will do Ames Web. 4 through 9 will do FastBridge. So we'll have some of that longitudinal data, but we're kind of starting over with just Ames Web then. Yeah.
And one more question, Kelly. Do we have ACT data back yet or not?
Yes, we do. We do have ACT data. We can't compare it to the other districts yet, but we do have it back, and we've started looking at it. It will be part of the data sets that we're looking at as a district and within our building teams the next couple days.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think the difficulty, Amy, that we are finding is historical and longitudinal data. So, like, for example, with the Ford exam, they changed the cut scores, so it makes it real difficult to do analysis looking backward. We needed to do what we needed to do this year with the 2 different universal screeners, but we also felt that it was important to maintain some of that integrity historically. And so we made the decision to be very cognizant of what our students are doing and what our staff are doing. And so we might not have the several years of historical data in these screeners moving forward, at least K3.
Did you guys look at the comparison, like scores, to see kind of just get an idea of what the difference is?
Yes, especially with that fluency passage. And so we noticed that, and every as you'll see in the packet, it depends on the school and the students, but why did most kids do better on one versus the other? And so it was nice to have both sets of data for this spring. We just know that's a lot of testing for the kids. So going forward, we can't do that. But yes, we definitely take a look at that as kind of why. I think one of the conclusions we came to was kind of what I referenced earlier. AimsWeb has certain words throughout the passage that aren't decodable at times, and they're also repeated. So maybe the word like cereal, that's not decodable for a first grader, but that will be in the passage maybe 4 times. So if the students don't have that background knowledge, that's 4 errors right there on that one passage. And then as I referenced earlier, the number expected. So FastBridge says, okay, 3rd graders, you need to read 125 to be 40th and above, and AimsWeb says 118. So for us, this year was maybe more about digging into the tests and what, it's asking the students to know. But of course, moving forward, it's why is there a difference and what are we doing about it?
Matt, can you speak briefly to the phenomena that we came across this year? I know that Jen and I have talked about this before with, our move to a new curriculum based on the science of reading. Could there be misalignment with the Ford exam? Was there, I think based on our conversations, we also found out that sometimes we don't get to certain things in our curriculum until, say, later on, yet the students are being assessed. There's misalignment in the timing of what's being done. Can you speak to that a little bit, Matt?
Sure. So per Act 20, students, kindergarten, this is one example, kindergarten students are assessed on letter names. Well, the science of reading philosophy in the curriculum, they don't teach letter names, they teach letter sounds first. And so when we saw some of this winter data for kindergartners, most did not do well on letter names. They did better on letter sounds because that's the scope and sequence of our curriculum. So that's another thing to consider. Speaking to the Ford exam, every year we take a look at what types of questions are on the Ford exam for literacy and math. And it will tell you, for example, for math, in I think most grade levels, there's only maybe 4 to 8 questions about geometry. And fortunately, in our scope and sequence, geometry is taught last. And so when the teachers see that some of the geometry scores maybe aren't as good, it's kind of okay because the exam isn't focusing on that. The Ford exam is focusing on what students would have been taught up until that point. And so, for example, numbers and algebraic operations, there's 12 to 15 questions about that on the Ford exam. So that's where our scope and sequence is more aligned with the Ford exam that way. But we've had to talk through it with teachers a little bit too of, it's okay if you're not introducing some of those things yet because they're not as much of an emphasis, at least in number of questions. But then the DPI also puts out a little checklist of, here are the number of questions per topic, but also how difficult those questions are. And so some of those numbers and algebraic operations, yep, there's 12 to 15, and they expect mastery of it. Whereas with geometry, there's only 4 to 8 questions, and it's only meant to be kind of an introductory knowledge. And so we take a look at that every year and really break down the test of what was asked of them and how did they perform in each little topic. And it's the same for ELA as well. Hopefully that makes sense.
I had one quick question that I'm kind of curious about. With some of the kids that do the fluency test, and then you have also parameters for their comprehension, do you find that those 2 scores usually are similar, or do you find that sometimes they can be different? Because like you mentioned, they could get bumped up on one word. A minute is fast. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're not comprehending the material.
That's very true. And the fluency is a great indicator of whether or not they will be able to comprehend. So those students that are reading fluently at grade level typically do better with comprehension. But if they don't, there's kind of, okay, now let's dig a little deeper. So if the fluency is low, literacy coaches will administer diagnostics. Okay, where is it initial sounds? Is it ending sounds? Where are they getting confused? And then if they did really well in fluency but not on comprehension, okay, are they reading too fast? Do they need more of the prompts of go back and, not during the test, but go back and reread, like when they're in their curriculum, go back and cite your evidence. retell this for me. Why do you think the author was writing this? Who was the author writing this passage for? What do you think the theme is? So there's comprehension's another level, but if they got to be fluent first, I guess, essentially is, in its most simplest terms, they got to be fluent first. But yeah, that's another way. And then that's where the error analysis comes in. Why did they not hit benchmark in the fluency? Or if they did, why aren't they meeting it for comprehension?
I have a question. I'm not sure who it's for. It might be for Amanda, or it might be for Joe. So there was a lot of data there. There's a lot of eye charts. The thing I think I caught on to is when you talked about demographics and you talked about the makeup of the classes, we've had a lot of growth in the subgroups, ILPs, IEPs, all that. So some very big numbers in changes from 21 to 25-ish. Is that having correlation on some of these scores that are kind of either flatlining year over year or a slight decline, or just the growth pattern that we're looking for?
I'll have Amanda come up with some more detail, but yes. So that concerns us because, again, you're not dealing with the same group of students yet.
Right.
Our accountability is on growth, right?
Correct.
But our biggest challenges are with these subgroups, and that's why Amanda and the team have been very focused on those subgroups. Amanda, can you talk more about that, please?
Yeah, sure. And I think even thinking about with the question that Matt just answered about the correlation between fluency and comprehension, you'll notice that a lot of our students who have disabilities are going to they're struggling on the fluency piece. And so until that is in order, and that's what a lot of our interventions focus on, is that fluency piece to try to improve that so that then they can have better comprehension. I think what's challenging though is it's not reflected in this 40th percentile and above. So when we analyze again at that student level, we're making some tremendous progress with a lot of students who have disabilities, but they're still in the 1st through 25th percentile, and so they might have been in single digits. And now at the end of the year, when I'm looking at our coaches SLOs or some of our teacher SLOs, those students are into the 20s, which is tremendous. That's huge growth. However, it's still not going to translate to looking at benchmark because they're so far behind. And if you think about what you asked earlier in the presentation about some of these students who then, they pop on a universal screener, we provide them intervention through our regular education process. They're already behind, they're staying behind despite all of the intervention that we're providing. And then they get to special education, they are oftentimes markedly behind where their peers are, and so they're not going to catch up in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years. So that gap persists, and over time we hope to close it. But again, all of our regular students are growing exponentially too. So that's the tricky part. I don't know if that answered your question, Mr. Zielinski.
It does. I guess I have a follow-on to that is what can we do as a board, or what resources can be provided, or what additional things can be done, because we're pushing hard for improved scores as a deliverable.
Right.
It's one of our key things we've been asking for, and I see from the data that linkage there, and I think you're saying that's a yes. So what can we as a board do to help make that happen? It doesn't have to be answered today, but I think it's something.
I do
should
think
explore.
that you should be aware, and I think based on, when we bring the Employment Services report to the board, you will have noted, I'll have Amanda speak to the specifics, but we've increased our resources as far as staffing goes with students with disabilities and with our EL students, I will say significantly over the past 2 to 3 years, Amanda,
Yeah,
roughly?
3 to 4, yeah.
Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. And so in addition to the staffing piece, so one of the things that we talked about was an additional instructional coach for our English learners. And so in addition to providing, because that's our most rapidly growing subgroup, and so we need some more certified EL teachers in our district to provide learning and coaching and resources to our classroom teachers that are with the students all day long, to teach them how to improve language acquisition within the classroom. And then because you approved as a board another English learner instructional coach, we also have more capacity for those 3 ESL teachers that we have to provide some direct intervention to students who are struggling the most. So really looking at data and saying, okay, which are students that we can provide some of the coaching in the classroom for as one level, which are some students that some of our EL, SLAs, or student learning assistants can work with and provide some intervention, and then where is our data really stagnant, and usually looking at more of that 4th through 6th graders whose reading is plateaued, even though they've been in country for a couple of years or who have some English proficiency now, but their scores aren't reflecting that. So then having our ESL teachers work directly with those students to try to look at what those barriers are. So supporting us with resources and finding creative ways to attract and retain staff, I think, is one thing. I think another thing, like Kelly talked about, is when Matt and Kelly are looking at universal curriculum and our teachers are piloting, special ed is a service on top of general education, and so is EL support. And we can't solve the problem through intervention alone, because it got to be a problem because Tier 1 didn't work for those students, but yet they're in Tier 1 the majority of their day. And
Can you just clarify what Tier 1?
Tier 1, sure, classroom instruction. So they're in the regular classroom instruction for the majority of their day, and then they receive some intervention on top of that to look at their disability-related needs, but not everything can be solved by intervention. And we can't just provide intervention all day long, or they would be missing core curriculum, thus widening the gap even further. So it's a catch-22. So when we look at how do we provide classroom teachers with professional development so that they can provide some of that intervention directly in the classroom in that Tier 1, in that universal curriculum, how can we choose a resource that provides strategies that get at the full gamut for our struggling learners all the way up through also providing extension. And that's really hard for our teachers. We've got phenomenal teachers, but their order is tall. So I think another way, again, going back to how can the board help support the administration in attracting and retaining students. And so when Mr. Miller's department gets up here and talks about our retention and compensation structure and all of that, I think that's critical so that we retain high quality staff, because it's a hard job. And then also, just supporting all of our efforts with mental health, getting those resources into schools, because our students are coming to us with bigger problems and more concerns and family challenges, and that affects the classroom and affects learning as well.
Yeah, and I do appreciate your comment, Matt, because we are held accountable to consistent growth over time. The one ask that I would have for the board is exactly what you mentioned earlier, is that there's a lot of moving parts actively occurring that pose a challenge to that growth that's expected. We expect it. But there's a lot of things happening with our student population that impacts that trajectory. And so we'll be looking at some of that data as part of my own review and some of the board goals as well. And I just ask that you consider that when you are looking at that data. And again, it's complex. And, yes, if we were manufacturing a widget where the widget was the widget, that was one thing, but we're not dealing with widgets, we're dealing with students in a lot of different dynamics. So that would be just something to be mindful of as we look at that moving forward.
Any other questions for our team? Thank you. We really appreciate the opportunity to get in front of you and be able to share the great things that are happening, because there are a lot of great things. So thank you for your support.
Thank you. Okay, so next we have our second read and then the approval of new policy 5411, third grade promotion and retention for at-risk students. Do I have a motion?
Yes. I move to approve new policy 5411, third grade promotion and retention at-risk students.
I have a motion by Ms. Crosby and a second by Mr. Zelinski. Is there any discussion? No discussion? Okay. Then all those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes. We have an action item from closed session. I have a motion.
I move to improve the employment services report as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Crosby, I'm sorry, Ms. Spindler, and a second by Ms. Crosby to approve the Employment Services Report. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes. We have future meetings and dates. Board meetings are generally held here on Mondays, beginning at 7:00 PM in Conference Room E, unless noted otherwise. So our next one is June 23rd. We have one in July, July 28th. And then the one then in August coming up after that is August 11th. We don't have any important dates, summertime. Guess it's summer break now. So then do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I have a motion by Ms. Crosby and a second by Mr. Zelinski to adjourn. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes. This meeting is adjourned.